Hello, everyone. I want to talk about something I think almost everyone can relate to. Most of us have been there at some point in our lives, in one form or another. And before I begin, I also want to make one thing clear. This isn't based on my personal experience. I research these topics before I talk about them. And what I am sharing here is grounded in established psychological and scientific research. I try to keep my own assumptions and biases out of it as much as possible, while still making the conversation easy and relatable. Also, I'm creating these talk to sleep episodes, especially for people who live alone or for anyone who wants some quiet company at the end of the day. The idea is that you can put your phone aside, stop staring at another screen, close your eyes, and simply listen, while hopefully learning something interesting along the way. So you don't need to watch anything, you don't need to take notes, just get comfortable and listen. And if there are topics you would like me to talk about, anything relationships, psychology, loneliness, habits, emotions, work, purpose, or simply some strange questions about why we behave the way we do, please let me know in the comments. I am building this series as I go, and your suggestions would genuinely help me decide what to explore next. And if this kind of quiet, research backed nighttime conversation is something you enjoy, follow along for more Talk to Sleep episodes. Tonight, I want to talk about something we often call love, when sometimes it is actually intensity. And those two things can feel almost identical in the beginning. Someone enters your life, and suddenly there is so much attention: good morning messages, good night messages, messages in between the messages. They want to know everything about you: what happened when you were 12, what your mother is like, your favorite song, your worst heartbreak, what you want your future house to look like. And 3 days later, we are discussing where the children will go to school. They tell you, I have never felt like this before. You are different. Where have you been all my life? You understand me better than anyone. You're everything I have been looking for. And of course, that feels wonderful. Because being intensely seen is intoxicating, especially if you have spent a lot of your life feeling unseen. Suddenly, someone is paying attention to every detail. They remember what coffee you drink. They call when you wake up. They want every free evening. They cannot believe how much you have in common. You say you love old movies. Amazing. They love old movies. You love mountains. They have always secretly wanted to live in the mountains. You mention a book, and it has changed their life too. And somewhere inside you, something begins saying, this must be extraordinary. Maybe it is. But here's the question I want us to sit with tonight: how much can somebody genuinely know about you before enough time has passed to actually know you? Because there is a difference between being fascinated by somebody and knowing them, and difference between desire and devotion, a difference between chemistry and compatibility, and perhaps most importantly, a difference between being intensely wanted and being deeply loved. Intensity is fast. Love needs information. Think about it logically. To deeply love another person, you eventually have to know things that cannot be discovered during a candlelit dinner. How do they behave when tired, when disappointed, when bored, when you disagree with them, when you are no longer endlessly impressed by each other? How do they treat you when you say no? How do they behave when you are succeeding and they aren't? What happens when you are inconvenient? Can they apologize? Can they tolerate frustration? Can they repair damage? Can they remain kind when the relationship isn't giving them constant excitement? You don't discover these things in 3 weeks. Time reveals them. So when somebody says very early, you are perfect, it may feel beautiful, but logically, they cannot know that. They barely know you. What they may know is the version of you currently existing in their imagination. And sometimes we make exactly the same mistake. We aren't in love with the person yet. We're in love with their potential, their attention, how desirable we feel around them, the future we have imagined. And the person our mind has started constructing between the pieces of information we actually have, and the brain is remarkably good at filling gaps. Unfortunately, it tends to fill romantic gaps with excellent material. And this is where romantic obsession begins to become interesting. There is nothing unintelligent about falling deeply in love. Highly intelligent people become romantically obsessed. Doctors do, scientists do, professors do, writers do. People capable of making extraordinarily rational decisions in every other part of life can spend Sunday afternoon wondering why somebody used a period instead of an exclamation mark. Romantic love recruits brain systems involved in reward, motivation, and focused attention. When somebody becomes highly emotionally significant, the mind genuinely prioritizes information associated with them. So, obsession isn't proof that intelligence has disappeared, but it can mean intelligence has become captured, and that's different. Imagine having an extremely powerful telescope, but pointing it at the same window every day. The telescope is still powerful. The field of vision has become tiny. That's what romantic obsession can do. You can be intellectually capable and psychologically narrowed. Because an intelligent mind doesn't merely obsess, it explains. You notice that somebody is inconsistent. A simpler interpretation might be they are inconsistent. But your mind says, well, their father was emotionally unavailable and their previous relationship ended badly, or they told me they fear vulnerability, and people with avoidant attachment sometimes retreat when intimacy increases. And when they said they needed space, what they probably meant was that they were frightened by the intensity of their own feelings. You now have a 45-minute psychological presentation explaining why somebody who hasn't called you in 8 days actually loves you very deeply. That's when your intelligence becomes a very dangerous. because your intelligence can create beautiful arguments for conclusions the heart already wants. The ability to reason is not the same thing as the willingness to accept inconvenient evidence. Sometimes intellectual maturity looks less like I understand every psychological explanation for this person's behavior and more like whatever the explanation is, this behavior isn't working for me. That's a much cleaner thought. And now let's talk about love bombing because this term is everywhere. TikTok has perhaps diagnosed half the dating population with it. So let's be careful. Not every person who is enthusiastic at the beginning is love bombing you. Healthy relationships can have exciting beginnings. People can genuinely be thrilled. They can text a lot, they can give gifts, they can be expressive, they can fall quickly. That alone isn't evidence of abuse. The term love bombing is usually used for disproportionately intense affection, communication, promises, or attention early in a relationship that helps establish influence, dependence, or control. The empirical research is still limited, but early work has linked love bombing type behavior with insecure attachment, lower self esteem, and narcissistic traits. While qualitative research on abuse or gaslighting relationships has described intense early affection as one part of some later controlling dynamics. But here's the important distinction: you cannot reliably know someone's motive from intensity alone. Sometimes excessive intensity is calculated, sometimes it isn't. Someone may genuinely believe everything they are saying in that moment, and this is actually very important because a person does not have to be consciously lying for their promises to be unreliable. People can promise from a feeling instead of from a capacity. This happens constantly. Someone feels enormous emotion today, so they make enormous promises about tomorrow. I will never leave you. We will always be together. I want to spend every day with you. You are my entire world. Maybe they are not lying. Maybe on Tuesday evening, sitting beside you, they genuinely feel that. But feelings are states. Commitment is a capacity. So the question isn't how intensely did they feel about me in the beginning. The question is what can they sustain when the emotional intensity settles? Because novelty settles, the nervous system adapts. You eventually stop discovering fascinating new things every 15 minutes. And there comes the dishes, deadlines, bad moods, traffic, laundry. Someone gets sick, someone becomes stressed, people become ordinary. And this is where love begins revealing its actual architecture. Some people are extraordinarily good at falling in love and not particularly good at loving. Those are different skills. Falling in love is largely an experience, and loving somebody is partly a practice. Falling is, I can't stop thinking about you. Loving is, I'm still curious about you after I think I know you. Falling is I want you constantly. Loving is I respect that you have a life separate from mine. Falling says you're perfect. Love eventually says you're absolutely not perfect, and I have now gathered considerable evidence, but I see you more accurately, and I still choose to care for you. That is deeper. Some people don't actually want the person, they want the feeling the person creates. This distinction is enormous. Someone may be obsessed with being desired, being rescued from boredom, having someone constantly available, feeling important, avoiding loneliness, escaping an empty life, or having somebody admire them, having emotional stimulation. Then you become the delivery system for those feelings. And in the beginning, they may treat you as though you are everything. But ask, are they interested in me? Or are they interested in what happens inside them when I am present? Those things can look identical at first, because if you make somebody feel extraordinary, they may shower you with attention. But what happens when you stop performing that function? You disagree. You develop needs. You are busy. You stop endlessly admiring them. You need support instead of providing it. You become complicated. Suddenly, the person they described as perfect isn't behaving like the character they created. And sometimes the intensity collapses remarkably quickly. Not because deep love disappeared overnight, because perhaps deep love had never had enough time to develop. The state of fascination disappeared. That is why somebody can make you their whole world and then leave. This can be one of the most psychologically confusing experiences. Yesterday, you were everything. 2 months later, I don't know if I feel the same anymore. And the person left behind thinks, how can both things be true? Maybe they weren't. But another possibility is that both reflected what that person genuinely felt at those particular moments. Some people organize relationships around intensity. When intensity is high, everything is enormous. Love is enormous, promises are enormous, plans are enormous. Then novelty declines. Ordinary intimacy replaces intoxication. And because they mistake intensity for love, they think something is missing. Then a new source of excitement arrives, and suddenly the old relationship feels dull. That pattern tells you something important. A person's ability to feel intensely is not the same as their ability to attach responsibly. Don't measure love by the beginning. This may be one of the most useful rules in relationships. Anyone can be extraordinary for 4 weeks. Seriously, 4 weeks is easy. You can be charming, responsive, generous, well dressed, deep, emotionally available. The beginning tells you very little about relational character. Instead, look at the curve. What happens after familiarity, after conflict, after disappointment, after boundaries, after you say no. That one is particularly informative because someone who loves your existence but cannot tolerate your autonomy may not actually be loving you very well. And watch what happens when you slow things down. This is a beautiful test for early intensity. You don't have to accuse anyone of love bombing. Just slow the pace. I really like you, but I want to take my time. Keep seeing your friends, keep your routines. Don't merge every weekend immediately. Don't hand over your whole emotional history because someone has been very attentive for 10 days. Don't cancel Saturday with your sister because this person suddenly wants every Saturday. Don't begin planning your life around someone whose behavior you haven't observed across enough situations. This is so important. A healthy person may be disappointed that they can see you every night, but they can tolerate it. A controlling or dependency driven dynamic often struggles much more with separateness. That's useful information. Obsession also likes scarcity. One of the strangest things about attraction is that uncertainty can make people think more, not less. When somebody is reliably there, your brain does not have to solve them constantly. When somebody is warm Monday, cold Tuesday, loving Wednesday, missing Thursday, your attention keeps returning. What happened? Did I do something? Or are they losing interest? Will they come back? And then they send a beautiful message, relief, excitement. Then distance again. Behavioral learning research broadly shows that unpredictable rewards can sustain persistent seeking behavior. Romantic relationships are obviously much more complicated than lab reward schedules, so we shouldn't reduce human attachment to a slot machine. But uncertainty can certainly become psychologically gripping. And this is why you have to be careful not to mistake the amount you think about someone for the quality of the relationship. You may think about someone constantly precisely because the relationship never feels secure enough to stop thinking about. There is nothing particularly romantic about that. And sometimes peace feels less exciting because your nervous system isn't working overtime. Imagine two relationships. Person A, consistent, calls when they say they will call, doesn't disappear, doesn't require interpretation. You know where you stand. Person B, incredibly intense, then distant, then passionate, then uncertain, then jealous, and then affectionate, and then absent. Person B may occupy much more of your mind, and therefore you may conclude, I must love B more. Maybe, or maybe B generates more cognitive work. Drama consumes attention, peace gives attention back. And one of the most underrated signs of a good relationship may be that you're still capable of thinking about other things. You can use this as a litmus test. Love should not destroy your ability to concentrate on your own life. This is where I return to intelligence. Again, ask yourself something brutally practical. What percentage of my mental capacity is currently allocated to this one person? 2 hours checking messages, another hour replaying a conversation, 30 minutes imagining the future, 20 minutes stalking somebody's followers, 45 minutes explaining their behavior to your friend or to yourself, and another hour constructing a reply designed to look as though you took exactly 7 minutes to write it. You may have a brilliant brain, but this is not necessarily its highest use. At some point, intellectual maturity becomes the ability to allocate attention according to value, not simply emotional urgency. Love cannot become the center of your entire identity because then you become psychologically fragile. There is a research on relationship contingent self esteem. When your sense of personal worth becomes unusually dependent on what is happening in your romantic relationship, people higher in this tendency experience larger self esteem fluctuations following everyday positive and negative relationship events. Interestingly, having more relationship contingent self worth does not necessarily mean feeling greater relationship satisfaction or closeness. This is exactly what obsession can create. They message warmly, I am desirable. They withdraw, I am worthless. They choose me, I matter. They leave, I must have been insufficient. Oh, I have been there. Now, another person's behavior has become your psychological stock market. That's an extraordinary amount of authority to hand another human being. Your self worth should not have live pricing. It should not rise 9% because somebody text miss you, then crash 12% because they viewed your message and didn't answer. Your worth existed before this person had your number. It should survive their opinion. And love bombing can exploit exactly this vulnerability. Again, whether intentionally or not, if somebody gives you unusually concentrated validation early on and you have been hungry for validation, it can feel like water after a drought. And suddenly you are beautiful, brilliant, special, different. They cannot believe anyone ever hurt you. They understand everything, and then that attention is withdrawn. Now, what do you want? Not necessarily the person, you want the state you experienced when they adored you. So you chase. Maybe if I'm more understanding, less demanding, more attractive, less emotional, more available, perhaps they will become the person they were in the first month. This is why intense early affection can be so powerful in coercive dynamics. Qualitative research on gaslighting relationships found that participants often described early excessive intimacy or affection, which could later contribute to confusion and discounting later harmful behavior. And this is why the question, how do I get the beginning back, can be dangerous. Maybe the beginning was not the baseline, maybe it was the advertisement. The relationship you actually have is what happens after the advertisement. So believe patterns more than highlights. This is one of the most rational things you can do. Don't evaluate a relationship using the best 20 moments. Look at the average. Anybody can create an extraordinary weekend. Ask over 6 months. Are they reliable? Do they respect me? Are they curious about my inner life? Can we disagree safely? Do they make room for my ambitions? Do words and actions generally match? Do they take responsibility? Do they care about my well being when there is nothing immediately in it for them? Can they love me without possessing me? Can I remain myself? That's much more informative than, but remember that night by the ocean when they said nobody had ever understood them like I did, and blah blah blah. Beautiful night. Still insufficient data. And what does deeper love actually look like? This is where I want to distinguish love from transaction. Real love isn't I give you attention so you give me admiration. I make you feel special so you never leave. I support you because I expect equal payment by Friday. Love has something inherently generous inside it. You care about another person's well being because their well being matters to you. Sometimes you give without receiving. Sometimes they have a difficult year and you carry more. Sometimes you celebrate something that benefits them and not you. Sometimes loving them means letting that freedom that doesn't send to you. But we need nuance here too. Non transactional love does not mean accepting a one sided relationship forever. You can love somebody without keeping a ledger and still require respect, reciprocity, safety, honesty, effort. A relationship cannot survive entirely on one person's selflessness. So, mature love says, I do not care for you merely to extract something from you, but also I do not have to destroy myself to prove that my love is pure. That's an important distinction. Love is deeper than getting. Deep love becomes interested in the existence of the other person, not merely their usefulness. You want them to grow, even when their growth makes them more independent. You respect their friendships, their work, their privacy, their difference. You don't need to occupy every room in their life to feel important. Think about how different that is from obsession. Obsession often says, come closer, reassure me, choose me, prove it, need me, don't change, don't go. Love can sometimes say, go become more fully yourself. I will meet you there. That's harder and perhaps more beautiful. This is also where purpose enters the conversation. Because one of the easiest ways to make somebody your entire world is to have too little world outside them. If your days contain work you don't care about, no creative life, no community, nothing you're building, nothing you're learning, nothing that feels meaningful, then romantic attention doesn't enter an already full psychological ecosystem. It arrives in an empty field. Of course, it grows enormous. So when people ask, how do I stop obsessing over someone? Sometimes the answer isn't think less about them, it's build more life. Your life needs something larger than being loved. This doesn't mean everyone needs a grand mission. You do not need to solve climate change before breakfast. Purpose can be extremely ordinary. Raising a child well, making useful research, caring for people, teaching, writing, building something, creating art, supporting your community, learning a craft, protecting your family, starting a business, serving something you believe in, helping one group of people have an easier life because you existed. Purpose gives your attention somewhere to go that is bigger than, does this person want me today? And I'll be careful here. Purpose doesn't remove heartbreak, it gives heartbreak context. Imagine losing the relationship but not losing yourself. That is the best. If this person disappeared from your life tomorrow, what remains? Your friendships, your competence, your work, your curiosity, your community, your ideas, your body, your home, your plans, and your future. If the answer feels like nothing, then that is not evidence of how extraordinary the love was. It is evidence that too much of your identity became concentrated inside the relationship. That's something you can rebuild. If you are in the beginning of something intense, ask better questions. Not how strongly do they feel, ask how consistently do they behave. How often, not how often do they text me, ask can they tolerate my boundaries. Not how romantic are they, ask how do they respond when I disappoint. Not do they say I am perfect, ask are they curious about who I actually am. Not have they promised forever, but ask what have they demonstrated today. If you have already become obsessed, don't make the obsession your next obsession. You do not need to wake up tomorrow and announce, I will never think of this person again. Good luck. The mind loves forbidden topics. Instead, begin reclaiming territory. 1 hour that belongs to your work, one evening that belongs to your friend, one weekend plan that does not involve them, one book, one project, one thing you finish entirely for yourself. You're not trying to erase love, you are restoring scale. And separate facts from fantasy. Take a piece of paper if you ever need to. Two columns, what I know and what I imagine. I know this they said they aren't ready for a relationship. Or I know they said that they don't want to marry. I imagine they secretly love me but are scared. Never go there. Never go to your I imagine column. Stop rewarding inconsistency with greater access. This one matters. Somebody becomes distant, so you become more available. They give less, you give more. They cancel, you accommodate. They disappear, you send the emotionally thoughtful message. They return, you instantly restore full intimacy. Then you have taught the relationship something. Withdrawal increases my investment. Instead, let consistency earn closeness. That's reasonable. You don't need to punish somebody. You simply allow trust to develop at approximately the same speed as evidence. Love slowly enough to see. I think that's perhaps the phrase. Love slowly enough to see. Feel whatever you feel. You cannot always control that. But don't reorganize your entire life at the speed of emotion. Let reality catch up. See them angry. See them stressed. See them bored. See them around people who can't offer them anything. See how they talk about their ex. See whatever they have long term friendships. See whether they keep promises nobody is applauding them for. Let time participate in your decision. Time is an excellent editor. Maybe love should not be the sun. Maybe it should be one of the brightest things in the sky. Important, beautiful, warm, something that changes the landscape. But not the only source of light. Because when one human being becomes your sun, you're forced to orbit them. And I don't think love requires orbiting. I think the healthiest love may be two people who each have a center, choosing repeatedly to move toward one another. So if somebody once gave you everything and then suddenly seemed capable of giving you nothing, don't automatically conclude the beginning was the truest part. Maybe it was simply the loudest part. Love is not necessarily loudest at the beginning. Sometimes real love becomes quieter, less theatrical, less intoxicating, and much more dependable. It's somebody remembering what makes you anxious, showing up to the boring appointment, letting you be irritated without threatening the relationship, supporting a decision that has nothing to do with them, telling you the truth, apologizing, repairing, giving you room, and just being there. Not because every day is exciting, but because they have learned who you are and continue choosing the relationship with open eyes. That is very different from you are everything, and after 10 days, maybe one of the deepest things someone can eventually say is not you are my whole world, but I have a whole world, you have a whole world, and I want to keep building a life where those worlds meet. Love should not require you to become smaller. Love should not require the world to disappear. And perhaps the goal is not to love less intensely, it is to love with more reality, more freedom, more judgment, more patience, more purpose. To be capable of saying, I love you deeply. I don't need to own you. I don't need you to complete me. I don't need to make you perfect. And I don't need your love to prove that my life matters. You are not my purpose. You are somebody I love inside a life that already has purpose. And maybe that is not less romantic. Maybe that is what finally makes love strong enough to become real. I hope it clears your mind and help you sleep too. Good night.